what socialism in the U.S. would look like. And I want to start by being really honest that, I don't know exactly what socialism in the U.S. will look like. Socialism is obviously very different in different countries based on the circumstances. So I can't say for sure what it will look like. I just want to give that caveat. But the essence of socialism at its very core is a society where the means of production, the factories, the mines, the railroads, etc., they're owned publicly and not privately. Under socialism, private property, not personal property, which is a distinction that needs to be made, but private property has been abolished. And I thought that what we could do is take a look at what socialism has looked like in other countries to give us kind of an idea of what socialism would look like in the U.S. So let's take a look at the Soviet Union, which, contrary to bourgeois propaganda, had enormous achievements in its time. The planned economy in the Soviet Union raised the standard of living and general conditions for the workers and the peasants. It guaranteed employment, pensions, free health care and education, vacations, and other social benefits to all. It lifted a semi-feudal country to world-class scientific industrial heights. It inaugurated the space age with the launching of Sputnik, the world's first space satellite, and it eliminated the boom and bust economic crises that are endemic to capitalism, and which, of course, working people in this country are becoming and around the world are becoming very aware of these days. It established solidarity with the oppressed people of the world as a guiding principle of foreign policy, and it made many more accomplishments in a world that was dominated and still dominated by developed imperialism. So, that's just a brief snapshot of what happened in the Soviet Union. I also want to look a little closer to home, geographically that is, at the small yet mighty island of Cuba. Under an enormous, crippling economic blockade imposed by the U.S. for many, many, many years, Cuba has provided health care not only for every single Cuban person, but has exported doctors all over the world. I think folks remember when Hurricane Katrina happened, Cuba was ready to send doctors here to the richest country in the U.S. and was denied. Cuba's Cinesex organization stands true to, I'm sure some of you know the words of the International, no more traditions change shall bind us. Well, Cuba stands true to that by instituting programs like Cinesex that work to change perceptions towards LGBTQ people, perceptions about sexuality. Women make up a fundamental core of the leaders, thinkers, and workers in Cuban society. So now, looking at what was accomplished in the Soviet Union and what is still being accomplished in socialist countries like Cuba shows what, I wrote this and then I didn't get the grammar right, sorry. shows the potential that socialism and a planned economy has for the world if they are built on a strong economic foundation free of imperialist war and sabotage. From an economic standpoint, the world has never been more kind of ready for socialism, or more ripe for socialism. A huge, technologically developed, centrally organized economy could very easily meet everyone's needs. In Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, Lenin said, this is I'm excerpting a little bit, but he said, when a big enterprise assumes gigantic proportions and organizes according to plan, the supply of primary raw materials to the extent of 2/3 or 3/4 of all that is necessary for tens of millions of people, when the raw materials are transported to the most suitable place of production, sometimes hundreds of thousands of miles away, in a systematic and organized manner, when a single center directs all the successive stages of work right up to the manufacture of numerous varieties of finished articles, when these products are distributed according to a single plan among tens and hundreds of millions of consumers, then it becomes evident that we have socialization of production, that private economic relations and private property relations constitute a shell which is no longer suitable for its contents, a shell which will inevitably be removed. Now, Lenin wrote that in 1917, and he was talking about the U.S. Oil Trust and its marketing and sale of oil in both the United States and in Germany. But, that was 1917. Just think about how much that system of organized production and profits has expanded since then. As that system has expanded, it's also expanded the worldwide working class, and it's strengthened the material basis for socialism. Marx and Engels, the founders of scientific socialism, explained that the most favorable foundation for the development of socialist society was in those countries where capitalism had already brought production to a very high level, and two, where the working class was most numerous and had a relatively high level of literacy and technical ability. And those levels of literacy and ability would arise from the working class's participation in large-scale production. The transition to a society where social planning could take place and goods could be distributed equitably to all the workers would be most easily accomplished in an environment of relative abundance, and that makes sense, right? So let's go back to our examples that we were talking about earlier. Russia was the poorest of all 13 European capitalist powers at the time of the Russian Revolution. And Cuba, as I mentioned earlier, has had to deal with this horrific blockade against it for years, and still does, along with numerous terrorist attacks and other threats that have all been fomented, supported by the United States. What the USSR and Cuba have accomplished, while constricted within these highly unfavorable circumstances, speaks volumes about what a socialist revolution could do under more favorable conditions. And who has the most favorable conditions in terms of production in a technologically advanced working class than the US? Okay, so I was asked to talk about what socialism will look like in the US, and maybe I've been equivocating a little, but here's what I think, and here's what I know socialism will look like in the US. And I wanted to give you the personal version, kind of what socialism will look in the US for a relatively young, queer, young woman of color, which is me. So today is an example of what socialism would look like. Every year on October 22nd, which is today, rallies are held around the country to condemn and fight police brutality, repression, and the criminalization of a generation. That's the heading that they use every year. And I think that, you know, my first inklings of political consciousness were after the Rodney King rebellions happened in my neighborhood. And when one after another of my friends, who were all young black men, were harassed over and over and thrown in jail and out of jail by the cops in Los Angeles. So when we win socialism in the US, October 22nd will become a day of remembrance. Because once the antagonism between the state and the people no longer exists, there will no longer be a need for a repressive police apparatus, and therefore there will be no more police brutality. Okay, so that's one. Two, I will no longer owe 35